Now that is what I call a display. Good evening and welcome to a rare sunset video from me. There's a damn good reason why I don't do videos in the evening, and that's because how busy places like Brighton Beach get. And to add to that, it's the weekend and I've got 3 kids. My wife said to me, Ben, the only way you're going out this evening is if you take Chloe with you. And then Chloe has her own demand. She said, I'm only coming out with you if I get some candy floss. She's clever, isn't she? Yes, she's getting some candy floss.
Yeah.
I think my skateboard suits you, Louise.
I look like a proper skater girl, don't I?
Look at the size of that though.
So I've got 4 hours in the car, you know.
Is it good? Yeah. Worth it. Alright, we've just quickly walked up and down the pier. We're looking for the best vantage point, and we think we found it's actually quite close to where you just come on the pier. So we came down here about 2 weeks ago and we were positioned on the beach, and therefore the subject was the end of the pier. This afternoon we are on the pier and we're photographing that way, so the subject in the background is going to be the West Pier or the i360, and then the starlings are going to be the foreground interest. So that's the plan. And we were just making sure that it's got a nice tidy background, so the further along the pier you go, the West Pier has then got some fussy buildings in the background, so closest to where you enter the pier. With or without the starlings, what a beautiful evening. Oh, look at that. I'd say that was pretty tough. So what they tend to do is they tend to hover around the West Pier, then they fly over to the Palace Pier, do their display, and then they go underneath the Palace Pier to sleep. So although we've pitched up quite close to the entrance of the Palace Pier, because they sleep at the end of the pier, I think that might have actually been a better spot. I think the show's over though, isn't it?
Yeah, let's go home.
Want to go home?
Please go home.
Bad
now.
enough?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt today's video, Future Ben here. I've returned to the Palace Pier. I didn't get the shot that I was after last time, so I've come back and I'm about an hour off sunset. But I've got a few tips and tricks I'm going to share with you. So I think one of the mistakes I made last time I was here is not knowing my subject well enough. Essentially, we positioned ourselves based upon the cleanest backdrop. The problem with that was that the starlings didn't actually fly in front of us, which is why I am now positioned at the end of the pier, closest to the carousel and the helter-skelter. So now that I've photographed the starlings a few times, I'm noticing their pattern. So they start off around the West Pier, and then they do their exhibition, their flight, and then just before they go to sleep, they fly underneath the Palace Pier at the end, which is where I'm positioned now, and then that is where they finish their display. But that's just this year. Next year they might decide to sleep in a different place on the pier. Right, now there are a few considerations when it comes to camera settings. Today I am using a DSLR and a 100 to 400 shutter speed. If you're photographing a subject and it's further away from your camera, so let's just say I've got this lens 300 or 400 millimeters and I'm shooting the West Pier and the starlings flying around the West Pier, that's about a mile away. So your shutter speed, no matter what it is really, those birds are going to be in focus and not moving. If the birds were right here in your foreground and then the West Pier is in the background, those birds are moving quicker relative to the background. So if you wanted those birds without motion in them, you'd have to have a much quicker shutter speed. So before you decide on your camera settings, think about the creative decision. Do you want those birds pin sharp without any movement? Alternatively, do you want a bit of motion in the birds to create a bit of energy in your photograph? Today I'm probably going to be shooting around f8 until the light levels drop so much so that I'm just not happy with the ISO that requires, but probably start at f8, and the shutter speed I'm probably going to be looking for, say, 300th of a second, maybe a bit faster, so that I can capture all of the birds static. And then the final decision you've got to make is whether you're going to be shooting handheld, on a monopod or on a tripod. There is an ultimate freedom in just shooting handheld. You can quickly react to the birds swarming around. Alternatively, there is some creative decisions you can make if you keep your camera on a tripod. Here's an example I took of the West Pier with starlings flying around it. I actually took about 50 to 60 photographs if I remember correctly, and then in Photoshop I kept obviously all the foreground static, and then I blended all of the birds from all 60 photographs into one, and then you get this ethereal, ghostly looking image. So there's a creative decision if you keep your camera on a tripod. See if you can keep your camera settings the same, and then you've got the flexibility to add multiple photographs. Having shot the starlings a few times from different locations, once on the beach, one from where the donut is, and then on the pier a couple of times as well, and from the West Pier, I've learnt a couple of things. First of all, ideal situation is you've got a nice clean blue sky, because that gives you a nice backdrop. When starlings are flying in front of clouds, they can get lost a little bit, so ideally you've got a nice clean blue sky. Secondly, nice calm wind conditions. If it's windy, they may not do a display, it may be too difficult for them. A few years ago, my daughter and I, Chloe, went out on a boat ride specifically to photograph the starlings. It was like an arranged tour starling photograph shoot. So we went to Brighton Marina, and then you took off from there at sunset, and rather than shooting from inland or all of the obvious places where everybody else does, we were able to photograph the starlings from behind the West Pier, behind the Palace Pier, just from out at sea looking back at the land. So don't just think your only options are on land. You can actually get a boat out to do this. So the shot that I'm missing from my portfolio is taken from here on the pier, and then there's a subject in the background which will probably be the West Pier or the i360. That's if the 360 is up. Don't forget that that 360 goes up once every half an hour, so if that is not in the sky that coincides with their display, you're not going to get that photograph. So it's either going to be the i360 or the West Pier, and the image that I really want to capture is with the starlings in the foreground. Probably a bit of movement from the starlings, but filling the frame, really zoomed in. That's the shot that I want. Fingers crossed that happens. Now that is what I call a display. Don't think I'm going to top that, so I'm going to end the video there. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.